We're 1 minute past the hour, y'all. So I think, I think let's kick it off. So to everybody, thank you for taking the time to join us today. We've got a value-packed webinar. Welcome to Leading into 2026, How Agencies Strengthening Readiness, Accountability, and Results. I'm William. I work in product marketing here at Powered DMS by NeoGov. I'm just here for a short intro, before I hand it off to the folks you really want to hear about today. This is a brief overview about what we'll be talking about, what's shaping agency priorities as we head into 2026, a practical framework to think about operational readiness, 4 specific priorities we're seeing across agencies, and we'll wrap up with a practical checklist and a 30-day leadership challenge as well. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the go-to panel at the bottom. We do save some time for a Q&A at the end. Sometimes we aren't able to get to it. If that's the case, please still ask your questions and they'll be answered via email. We'll make sure to get back to you. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No problem. That's okay.
I hit the wrong button.
No problem at all. And just another quick reminder that a link to the recording and slides will be emailed to you. So please look out for that post-webinar email. And in addition to the bonus resources of a professional standards command brief and a readiness checklist for 2026. And that's all from me. So I'm going to hand it over to the folks you really want to hear from today. And I think, Andy, you're going to lead us off with intros here. If we could go to the next slide.
Oh, looks like they did it by rank, and I'm the low one on the totem pole. So good morning, everyone. Andy Henricksen, as you can see, Director of Law Enforcement Strategy. Joined about a little over 3.5 years ago as a consultant, and then full-time. It'll be 3 years here coming up in January. Mainly working on a professional standards software. I did 28 years with Las Vegas Metro Police. Spent a lot of times K9 Commander, Patrol, Academy Sergeant, and then my last rotation was assigned to professional standards as a lieutenant over our training. So had a chance to work with Jessica quite a bit on our other products. Excited to be here and excited to hear from both the, at a command level as we talk about this, what's weighing on their minds that everybody can relate to. So good morning and thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jessica Tyler. I'm a retired deputy chief from here in New Mexico. Spent the duration of my career here in New Mexico in a couple different capacities. So spent the bulk of my career with the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, where I worked my way up the ranks to chief deputy. Left there, spent a couple years at the Albuquerque Police Department working on DOJ reforms and was the major over their professional accountability unit. And then finally retired from the Farmington Police Department as the deputy chief. Been here with Power DMS now for just a little over 3 years, or I guess almost coming up on 3.5 years. Came on with our partnership team, working on our accreditation initiatives, working with partners across the United States, and then became our general manager of our professional standards software about 1.5 years ago. So again, like Andy said, really excited to be here with you all today, and really want to thank Evan for being here with us as well to give us that perspective of agencies still utilizing our software and still in the trenches doing the work today. So thanks so much for being here with us, Evan.
Well, first off, I'm very humbled and happy to be invited to the panel today. I want to thank you and Andy and Will and your teams for that invite. My name is Evan Kunert. I'm a retired deputy chief of police from small town Arizona. Spent over 20 years with the Kingman Police Department, with the last 10, including today, which is a complicated and interesting story, in professional standards. Upon my retirement, I worked for the state accreditation program, which ended up being the background, the latter half of my career, doing accreditation among many other things. But currently I'm tasked with special projects after having returned from retirement, special projects, facility improvements, and have been the Power DMS Master Admin from my agency since 2018, which I think is what's leading me here today. So I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the panel.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. So really want to start off with, why does this briefing matter heading into 2026? And I think, so often at this time of year, we're reflecting on what we've accomplished in 2025, kind of looking ahead to 2026, realizing maybe where we've moved the needle within our agencies, maybe where we haven't. also reflecting on what challenges were we really tackling and where can we move forward from those. And so kind of going back to our trends report from 2025, some of these elements are just going to be things that we have dealt with in law enforcement for my whole career, Andy's whole career, Evan's whole career. And, you know, the pendulum kind of swings on them, and maybe we see different flavors of them. But things like recruitment and retention of our personnel are always something that is top of mind for police leaders across the United States. And so when we really think about what are the things that lead into our recruitment challenges, as well as that retention piece, what can we do within our organizations to ensure that we're keeping people for the duration of their career and not losing employees early? And so again, so many agencies, 73% still say that recruitment is, you know, one of the main challenges that they're dealing with. And again, 64% of those say that retention piece is part of that as well. And so when we think about also the fact that we are being asked to do more with less, we have more pressure to be transparent, we have more pressure to be accountable to our communities, which is a great thing, but how do we show that accountability? What mechanisms can we use to really help us have those conversations with our communities and also lessen the workload of our line level employees all the way up through the ranks? And so how can we do all of that together to really build in those efficiencies and help us ultimately keep our people, be accountable to our communities, and have good staffing? And so again, while we're looking into 2026, we're looking at balancing, you know, that staffing stability, making sure we have that accountability piece, make sure that we're doing things like building in cleaner workflows, processes to help minimize that time, and use our resources widely. And I know, Andy, you wanted to shed some light on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've always had that issue with hiring, recruitment going through. What I've seen, you know, going across the country, speaking to sheriffs and chiefs, is that retention percentage is increasing. I'm seeing a slow increase from conversations and concerns. And obviously, if we retain more people, we wouldn't have to recruit as many. So there's a kind of connection piece that's on there. And some of the conversations were the frustrations. You know, the people we're hiring. It's different from when I joined in the early to mid 90s. The expectations they have, the ease, the workflows, the systems you bring in to simplify it on the front end can assist with that retention level, which connects back to maybe we don't have to recruit as many, so we can kind of take the burden off of that. So as we talk about that, thinking about when we start getting into the systems and the accountability and people and that interconnection on how each one connects and that loop that it brings back, I just wanted to start thinking about that as we continue on with the slides and have these conversations.
And so what are leaders really seeing, again, heading into 2026? Since we've talked about these things a little bit, but a better way to visualize this is having those, you know, being mindful of how accountability expectations are rising, both within our organizations, within the profession overall, within our communities, how we can help achieve that and make sure that our operations are stable. We think, you know, a lot of times leaders are feeling like that's harder and harder to maintain because of those pressures that our employees are feeling with that uptick of scrutiny, right? The uptick of the amount of administrative work that they have to do. So how do we as police leaders ensure that they can be less stressed by the demands that are being put on them so that we can be operationally ready? And then we hear this all the time, and especially as we get more and more technology and we have solutions that maybe fix a certain pain point for our agencies, we can end up with very fragmented systems where our information isn't communicating to each other. And it makes it hard for police leaders to be able to make decisions. It can create those blind spots, have a delay in us being able to see that data together. And so really trying to minimize that pain point for our organizations is something we care deeply here about at Power DMS. And then with all that, you know, just those workflows are still taking longer than they should, whether we're on paper processes or, again, maybe systems with information living in silos. Having those disconnected tools really slows down our ability to move things through the review process, get that information to us where we can be making timely decisions and supporting our personnel. And so again, you know, what are the expectations of leaders? They really want that process to be faster. they want, it's just like anything, that immediate gratification that we have in society across the board. We're seeing that within police organizations as well. We want to be able to have that information faster, have it make sure that it's reliable, and have it all come together in that one picture. And so here, how do we think about that operational readiness in a simplistic way? And so when you think about, it starts with our people. We wouldn't be able to run our organizations without our people, and we know our people are our most prized resource. And so again, making sure that we can support them, make things stable for them, as well as give them the tools they need to be successful are extremely important. And a lot of times that comes in with having very well-defined and unified systems to allow those workflows to work well, and also provide visibility to all people within our organizations. So empowering first-line supervisors, having that visibility into what their people are doing, what their tasks are, all the way up the chain of command to ensure that everybody has the information that they need to do their job with whatever seat they hold within the organization. And ultimately, we want all of that to feed into accountability. And so when we have good documentation, we get that good data, then we can take that and have good follow through. And, Evan, I think when we come from accreditation backgrounds, this is something that's maybe been ingrained in us a little bit longer, right? Having that documentation. But I think what so many people still lack is that follow through mechanism. And Andy, you kind of already talked about this or touched on it, and I know we'll talk about it later, but really thinking of it in that cyclical fashion of closing the loop or that continuous process improvement. And so really thinking about that as we work towards operational readiness. And I think, Evan, you maybe wanted to share a little bit of insights here as well.
Well, I think you nailed it right away with the accreditation piece, especially. Everything that we do starts with sound policies and sound training. And with that comes a consistency that needs to follow, and that's within leadership and discipline, being organized, being streamlined. And then also working with the line level employees to ensure buy-in, that there is a level of education with purpose behind the policies and the systems being used. So it is maybe a mini loop within that loop for a symbiotic relationship for the entire process to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the, just the quick simplistic language here at the bottom. We really can gain ground as agencies when we connect these dots. And it's something I talk about even just with our professional standard software, but it's really true about any areas within our organization. The more touch points that we have and the more connected we are, rather than having things be in those silos, not treating things separately, treating them as a part of the whole or being part of that continuous loop, it makes us better. And so again, like Will stated, we have 4 different priorities we wanted to cover today that we think can really help drive this conversation home. And the first is just really about accountability with clarity. And so how can we do that? And when is accountability strongest? And it's strongest when our documentation, our processes, our policies are steady and clear. And I can't drive this home enough, but I'm going to skip to the middle bullet point here of just consistency, because yes, we want to make sure everything is completed and things are, we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's, signing our policies. Yes, that is stage 1 for sure. But we also need to have that consistency piece. And so if things aren't consistent, we all know things aren't going to go well, right? And this really provides comfort for our employees. When they know what to expect, that can also really help increase our retention, because, it's just like when people say, oh, they don't want to be disciplined. Well, when there's structure, right, we know that humans thrive with structure. Law enforcement officers are no different. Police leaders are no different. So when we have consistency within our organizations and we can rely on that predictable reporting, the review quality across supervisors, we know things are being done consistently across the board, that really helps drive greatness within our organizations. And then of course, going into having a centralized place for all of these things to occur. So that, a single place to understand what actions have been taken, where we're at within an organization, what changes we need to possibly make to policy and training, or maybe tweaks and even things like manpower on shifts, etc. And so when we have accountability with clarity, that really sets the foundation for our agencies. And Evan, I see you shaking your head. I think that maybe you had something to share about, especially being able just to have that consistent mechanism, moving off of paper and implementing some different processes within your agency.
Well, there's no doubt about that. So it took us a while, and this product has been very beneficial to do that, to move away from paper, and also being able to have real actualized analytics, real time, drawing from our CAD, and having a platform for which all of our supervisors are able to not only seamlessly get in, but also be on the same page with how to, how to grade a document, for example, or how to handle a disciplinary issue. And also having the ability of stable workflows. They're built by the master admin rather than, getting lost along the line in a mailbox or an email. And then, of course, the singular platform where everything's tied in together. All suites have been, invaluable for us as an organization. And so all of that ties into the consistency from an end user standpoint.
Yeah, I think it just makes it so much easier on our employees.
That didn't fall on deaf ears. That's been one of our focuses on 25 for us as well, is that centralized location. Being able to provide that to a command staff or any person that logs in, trying to find ways to simplify it as well. Be understanding that you guys as deputy chiefs, those at the higher level command staff, you're getting pulled in many different directions. It's not just the employees. You've got those external stakeholders that when they want something, they want it now. So if there's one spot you can go and get that information, it helps us showcase. When we talk about accountability, it also helps us showcase the job well done and the outstanding job that we're doing. That in turn can help go on there. So. Wanted to add that it's not falling on deaf ears on our end as well, or many other companies. We're looking to find ways to make sure it is more centralized and easier to access because you need it quickly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so our second priority that we wanted to highlight today is that stability through support. And so again, to your point, Andy, and that was a great segue. I don't even think you meant to do that, but it's not just about holding people accountable. It's also about commending them when they are doing well, or showing them that we are there to support them throughout their careers. So whether that's through additional resources, giving them a little bit of time off, just having a conversation with them, letting them know that we're aware of their well-being, those types of things can, really help make these shifts. And when we allow our agencies to have that visibility earlier on, we're better able to support our employees, and that will in turn lead to a longer duration of their career, which again reinforces that retention and reduces our need for recruiting. And so again here, having that workload, having the knowledge of the workload our employees are under, and being able to do that with something like Vitals, being able to track the types of traumatic calls they're on or the amount of calls they're on, and actually quantifying that gives us better visibility into what stresses they might be under, how that is compacting for our employees. And instead of like a lot of us that were maybe old school, instead of thinking of it as like it's just part of the job, actually peeling back that layer, looking into the actual holistic part of how our officers are doing and be able to support them earlier. And again, making sure that it's clear for our supervisors. And so Andy and Evan, you guys both already kind of touched on this, but having that visibility and that information available to our first line supervisors is really essential, where they can then identify potential risks with their employees before they escalate. And so again, the idea here is to not wait till we have a trigger on a conventional early warning system, but for me to be able to say like, oh, wow, Andy's been to a string of really bad calls lately. I'm going to check in on him and just see how he's doing. And we all know that goes so far, right? Like if you've ever had a supervisor reach out to you and say, how are things going? Or I know that you went to a bad call. How are things going? That means the world, right? So even just that conversation can really change the trajectory of that officer, deputy's well-being. And again, doing this in a supportive way. It's not about being punitive, right? It's about being supportive because the end goal is to retain our employees. And Evan, I know you wanted to add something here.
Yeah, you can see me nodding. So in my experience, that retention for the most part is a choice on behalf of the employee. And it can usually be something that's intervened with a supervisor. So our goal has always been to hire and then retire. And if there was something in between that caused somebody to leave, we have to pause and do a little self-reflection to see if there was something else that we could have done. So I'm looking at the clarity slide here, and supervisors can act before issues escalate. And quickly came to mind was burnout and liability. And that's extreme value that I found in the Vital Suite, where it's doing the predictive trending for the supervisor and then sending out an alert. So even if the supervisor wasn't cognitively aware of a potential issue brewing or having brewed, they are now going to be alerted to it. And the flip side is now we've helped retention if we can intervene and fix whatever issue may be happening. And that also bleeds over into just overall wellness component of our workforce.
Yeah. Can't agree more. And I really love the word here, stability. Also just want to quickly touch on the point of, empowering our supervisors. So being able to also help our first line supervisors be more comfortable with these conversations, I think is such an important piece of this, and definitely something that we're getting better at. I think that there's still room for us to do that, but being able to have the information is the first step in for supervisors to be able to support their personnel. So moving on to priority 3, and we've talked about this a lot, or touched on this a little bit already, but having easier workflows, just simplifying our processes and making sure that people are getting things in a timely fashion, so that ultimately supervisors aren't having to spend time tracking down that email or the piece of paper, or realizing like, oh gosh, I lost track of where this use of force review was at, or where this policy is being tracked. And so allowing supervisors more time to actually lead their people and be out supporting their squads or their teams is really important. And so keeping things simple, again, making things faster, more efficient, and also just being then able to focus on those things so that we have less time navigating systems or multiple systems, or trying to get, maybe a paper process into a different process. Being able to get that data together allows for quicker decisions as an organization, which ultimately allows us to pivot to things, to be able to change policies or provide training, et cetera, when needed. Did either of you guys want to add anything here?
Sure. So as far as the faster reviews, for us, again, moving from paper, and I'll talk about that later on as well, we've realized instant notification through the notification process in the suite, seamless rejection. And when I say rejection, meant for editing or missed data needs to go back, it can be done instantly and from afar rather than a paper mailbox. And then again, instant referral for investigation or intervention if necessary. So it is taking a lot of time out of the process itself, and also taking a lot of physical time away from a supervisor who's better off actually supervising the employee.
That's the key point: efficiency for the front line, efficiency for the supervisors. The return on investment is just more time in the uniform that they can go out and either, if they're a leader, getting out there with their folks. If they're out on the front line, it's out to providing service to those that we swore to protect and serve. So efficiency is definitely the key point.
Yeah, and really that allows us to also drive accountability faster, right? Because we know timeliness in addressing any type of behavior that was maybe out of policy or needs training. If you're able to do that in a faster fashion, it's so much more effective than, I know back in the day when we first started, or it was, and like I said, we've made huge strides, but it wasn't uncommon for a review to take months, and not nearly as effective to then recoach somebody or retrain them when it's months after the fact than if you can do it within a week or 10 days of, it's much more effective to be able to address that behavior in close proximity to the incident. And so the last priority we'll talk about here today is that connected readiness. And so, so much easier to maintain, again, when our information is connected. And so again, having systems that talk to each other, having things that are connected, being able to align all of our practices and processes can really be a game changer for organizations. And it really minimizes the amount of blind spots that we might have within our organization. And then ultimately that makes it more reliable. And so when we, again, have that consistency and we have meaningful reviews, then we can have better outcomes through managing our people, ensuring again that our policies are aligned with our practices, that we're making any adjustments that we need to in training or correcting behavior, and also just being able to have those conversations with our community then that these are our processes, this is how we're reviewing, and have that accountability factors within our organizations, and then being able to have that conversation both internally with our personnel as well as externally. And that's something I always like to touch on too, because when we do have to make a policy change or have a training pivot in our training and we have the answers as to the why, it's so much easier for our employees to accept that change when we're able to provide them those reasons.
So from an information alignment, I found value in the fact that I can pull my employee jackets directly out of Power DMS seamlessly into professional standards and simply add them to the workflow and the grouping. And therefore, that cut down on my time rather than having to rebuild entire jackets into a different system. And also having that interoperability with the personnel jackets and adding my CAD in, which I'd already had from that tie-in with a different suite. Now I have actionable data and it's instant. So from an analytics standpoint, I can literally go in after a call for service or a group to do a group analysis on trending and have that data within a few minutes and share it if necessary.
And so much of a better informed review then that you have as well, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's not necessarily debatable unless there is a CAD error, right?
Yeah.
So, or a data entry error, which can be traced backwards. But on the analytics side, the trending speaks for itself because the odds are the data is sound.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit about this modern readiness loop. And, this was something that I really learned kind of later in my police career, but it was with my work on our DOJ reforms at the Albuquerque Police Department, and really thinking about that continuous feedback loop, and not just a feedback loop, but closing the loop on things. And so the same thing occurs with, I feel like this can really elevate our agencies in all things we do. And again, I always use kind of the example of accreditation. Accreditation kind of leads you down that path, but unless you're really going above and beyond, it doesn't necessarily always force you to go back and close that loop. So that's what I always challenge agencies to do. And that's really what drives that continuous improvement. And so of course, being able to, detect things early is extremely important. And our ability now to track so many different indicators with our people, or like you're saying, Evan, identify those trends or patterns, whether it's with our police actions or whether it's with our processes, et cetera. Having that early detection is so important. And then when we're able to document and capture those things consistently, it then allows us to demonstrate what's happening and then again make those changes. And if we think of that in a cyclical fashion, of that continuous loop, it can really ensure that we are making action, or making decisions and then taking action with confidence within our organizations. And Andy, I know that you love kind of this cyclical review process and continuation, and I think that's something that you guys did a great job at with your time at Las Vegas Metro. If you want to kind of talk about how you guys did that from the training aspect as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to identify what we did, why we were doing it, and could we have done it better. Looking at those trends that are occurring not only within your own jurisdiction, neighboring jurisdictions, but across the country, and then that training to provide this policy. Do we have policy? Is it too restrictive? Is it not restrictive enough? If we have policy that's good, is it our training or tactics? How do we look at that? And then what did we do throughout that year? So as you can see, these are all connected. to know where we're going, we need to know where we've been. We can only do that through good documentation to provide us the analytics. Now we can demonstrate and look, here's what's improved. Here's what's not improved as we close that out on that loop and go, we need to emphasize this again for the new year or some additional training, or we can see those changes and say, hey, look, the effort we put in, we've made these strides, we've made these changes, we've seen, you know, an increase in de-escalation or whatever it might be, or a decrease in our use of forces going across the board. So being able to connect it at that year end or whatever that year is and identify, but you can only do that if you've got good documentation, and that goes back to Henricksen and allows you to detect it sooner and identify, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what you need to do as a leader to make those fixes.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about that is I think, you know, our employees are really appreciative when police leaders are responsive, right? So when they see that it's like, okay, I'm not just doing these reports, but when we do these reports and they're being looked at, like it does matter, right? What we're doing matters. The reviews matter because it is driving decision making. It is driving our training. It is driving, okay, but they identified we need to have a different, less lethal tool, or they realize we need to have more de-escalation training. And so when you can, again, communicate that to your employees that the work that they're doing is being looked at and is being utilized to drive decision making within the organization, I think that also goes, again, a really long way for employee morale, because they don't think that they're just sitting there doing this paperwork for no reason, or that it's only going to be resulting in disciplinary measures, when they can see other actions as a result of the reviews and the paperwork that they're doing. I think that that appreciation goes a long way.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, what our agency seen in the field. So again, we have Evan here to be able to talk about his experience at Kingman PD. And again, we're talking about, you know, the traction that your agency has been able to gain from this. Again, we just talked about the morale and accountability improving together, and then generally just what leaders can do and how it's worked within your agency.
Yeah, thanks for that. When I came back to the agency at the beginning of 24, I still had the privilege of working in police administration. And one of the first things that I was tasked with was exploring, you know, platforms in which we could place our discipline in and employee wellness and get away from paper for the most part. And it just so happened to be at that time, Jessica, you and I connected on the future of the professional standard suite. So for me, it was a no-brainer to jump right in to exploring it and see how it would fit for us. At that time, our early warning system had been compelled by accreditation, so we had to draft something, I should say, before we started this process. We had to draft a program and put it on paper. And because it was paper-based, it was completely subjective and mostly unactionable, and that was mostly due to delays in the process. It's not necessarily a personnel problem that was just, you know, fledgling. And unsupported for the most part. Use force reporting had always traditionally been paper-based. It resulted in only an annual review. It was a multi-day process because it was so cumbersome to sift through all the dirt and the paper. And retention of all that paperwork became somewhat of a nightmare to not only hold on to, but purge when the time came. And even IA was paper-based. It was a sluggish complaint follow-up process. And so for us, this tied it all together. And so I see on the slide there, cleaner, faster, better. Man, I couldn't have said it better, because it was night and day compared to what we were doing. As far as the morale and accountability, it became a symbiotic and symmetrical review. It wasn't left to the supervisors to figure out or take action upon. We were provided with the clarity of the process and the ease and ability to take care of all these, what used to be paper, now tied into one system instantly. And for a master administrator like myself, or another commander that's been given the rights, we can keep track of the process to make sure that it's moving through on a constant, regular basis. So for us, just moving out of the dark ages was priority one, but when we had the opportunity to tie it into an existing system, man, we jumped on it.
Awesome. And how has the feedback been from the field? I know change is always hard. So, you know, when you're rolling new things out, it can be a challenge. So now that it's been a little bit of time, are people used to that new process? Is there, an appreciation for them getting feedback sooner as well?
Sure. The cliche of cops hate two things, the way things are and change, that's long gone. What we found with a newer generation of officers that we're hiring, they expect change and they want to remain interested in the job. And because of that comes the change and the opportunity to do something different. And the expectation upon command is to explain why. And as long as that understanding and that ability to be able to relate and provide from a command standpoint, we did not run into any sort of walls with the change, if you will, moving from paper to digital, and for a time efficiency motive behind it. So
right.
I suppose in the long roundabout way to answer your question, no, it was nothing but a benefit.
Yeah. And I think, you hit the nail on the head there too. Like our current generations, they expect things to be fast, right? So it's like they're actually questioning why are we doing it on paper, or why is this system so clunky, or why do I have to log into 5 different applications to get something done? And so I think there is a high level of appreciation there when things are streamlined, accessible, and efficient for them. And so what does this, 2026 modernization really look like in a day-to-day practice? And so again, information staying connected instead of living in separate systems, breaking down those silos, making those connections across our different pieces of information is extremely important. Again, making sure that our supervisors have access to the information they need, and that way they can act faster, they can act with more confidence, and ultimately in that we want them to be supporting their employees, addressing any issues that might occur in a timely fashion, but ultimately be able to also provide that support for them. And of course, doing those things in a consistent manner matters to our employees, as well as it becomes easier to track and harder to miss, again, eliminating those blind spots. And ultimately that leads to stability in our operations, because there's fewer surprises, there's fewer things that come up and it's like, oh, why didn't we know about this 6 months ago? Why did it take us a year to know this? How did we miss this, etc. And so again, when our information can be connected, leaders are able to act sooner, they're able to act smarter, and able to give that better follow through, which then improves and ultimately stabilizes our operations. And I think that definitely leads to increased morale. And so we have a little bit of a readiness check for 2026. So things that you can go back to your organization and look at. And again, starting with our people, our most valuable resource. Do we understand who's carrying the hardest load? Do we really understand what it's like for our officer, our deputy, or our detention officer to be able to complete the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis? Do we really understand what it's like for a sergeant to try to drive accountability if they don't have the information they need to be able to know what their people are doing? And do we have tools in place to be able to spot potential liability risks early? And we all know, I'm sure all of us on this call have been involved in lawsuits. And so when you're able to answer those questions when an inquiry comes in or in a deposition, that you had the tools you needed to be able to address any type of issue, you're helping your employees, you're helping your agency, you're helping our profession. And really that comes from the accountability piece, right? So do we have the mechanisms in place to be able to have that consistent follow through across our supervisors, across our agencies? Are our reviews timely? Are we even doing reviews? It wasn't so long ago that a lot of agencies still weren't doing use of force reviews, or they were only doing things on, maybe officer involved shootings. And so are we doing things timely? Because again, if I'm doing a use of force review 4 months after the fact, is that going to really be effective to go back and try to make any changes? Yes, better late than never, but not as effective as if you could do it in a much faster fashion. And then again, ultimately having our systems be connected, making sure that our workflows aren't taking too long, and making sure that administrators and leadership can get clarity in a very fast access to be able to have that snapshot of analytics, to be able to show them where they stand as an organization, help them make their decisions. So those are all things that you can look at within your own organizations to kind of get a temperature check, if you will, on how things are going. Think of it as going to take your car in for an oil change or that preventative maintenance. Look at these things within your organization, identify a couple areas that maybe you want to work on. Evan, I see you shaking your head, so I don't know if you wanted to add anything here, but.
Yeah, from a user standpoint, as far as operational load, I can instantly get numbers from all 3 suites. I can do a use of force analysis on a person or a group and have figures, segregated by what information I want to know. I can also compare complaints or, accolades if I want by person or group, and then also compare them to the poll scores and have a clear picture on an operational load, whether it's imbalanced on a person or a group. And that not only points possibly at a behavior from a singular person on the line level, but it can also point to a supervisory problem. And so it tends to be eye-opening, again, real time, rather than it being trending or a complaint that you have to do a full paper investigation on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that insight. So thanks for sharing that. And I think that's invaluable, right? As a police leader. And so, moving into the next 30 days as we move into 2026, hard to believe that 30 days from now will be a third of the way into the first month of 2026, but that's where we're at. And so a little bit of challenge for you all. We'll follow up with you all via email. So you have homework assigned, so don't be that person that doesn't do it. Of course, I'm teasing, but the leadership challenge for you is to look at, again, one area that you can really decide to focus on over the next 30 days and just improve that visibility. So again, whether it's that people area, the accountability, or the systems, but here's some feedback for you on an area that you could focus on within each of those categories. And again, making those small changes can really help us get that momentum going to change that operational readiness for our agencies. I know sometimes things can seem overwhelming and it seems like, where do we start? So I love this challenge because it gives you a couple ideas of areas you can start with as you move forward to really get things rolling in 2026. And so with that, I did leave just 1 minute for us for Q&A. I don't know if we had any messages or questions come in through the chat. So as we're thinking about that, I just want to click to this next slide. If you want to continue this conversation or learn more about any of our products, you can scan either of these QR codes and we will reach out to you and show you how our solutions can assist your agencies with your operational readiness.
Hey, Jess, do we have time for a single question here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? Yeah, okay, there's one posed to the panel. Where do agencies usually gain traction first when they start connecting their systems? So open floor if anyone wants to take that one.
I can take that first. We, as an agency, bought all 3 suites for professional standards from the get-go, but also made a conscious decision to dip our toes in before swimming, and that helped with the growth internally. We started full on with a fresh data set January 1st of this year with use of force action reporting, and then integrated slowly after that into the remaining suites. And now, having done that, rather than become overwhelmed by a lot of process, it's proved beneficial across all lines. So that's been based on my experience.
Yeah, and I think for me, my advice to agencies would be, like, you could go about this a couple of different ways. Again, going back, and I'll back these slides up just real quick. Again, if you pick one area where maybe you think you can either is your biggest problem or where you can have your biggest win, I think that's how an agency can gain the biggest traction. So it's like, pick one area that you want to make more operationally efficient. Like Chief said, it was for them, it was the use of force reporting. It could be, you know, whatever your pain point is for your agency, or it might even be something like, okay, maybe we just need to start off with our policies, or maybe we've had some wellness issues and we want to start with vitals, and we want to start, again, to your point earlier, we don't want to make our early warning system just a check the box routine. We really want to elevate how we're supporting our employees and make our early intervention more meaningful. We want to be more wellness forward with that. Maybe you start with vitals. And so I think that that's really a question that is dependent on where an agency is at. But I love your advice, Evan, of, you know, maybe start small. Some agencies, you know, again, it depends on kind of, I think, the culture of the agency. Some agencies want to just rip the Band-Aid off and they're going to jump into the deep end and we're going to do this. That can work. For other agencies, depending on the culture or the amount of personnel you have to dedicate it to it, maybe it's starting with that biggest pain point that you're having.
I'll add to that on there. I think where they usually gain traction first is probably going to be that first priority that we discussed, accountability with clarity, because it helps them with those consistent reports that are complete, and it gives them all that information that's centralized, so the deputy chief can go in and identify that information, and then obviously it jumps right into that connected readiness on priority 4. So first priority and the priority 4 are the ones that I've seen where they really gain traction the quickest, I guess you say, as they get up and running.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for that. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. We appreciate your time and attention. We'll follow up with the email. Look forward to hearing back from you guys what you chose for your challenge. Happy holidays, be safe, and we'll see you in 2026.
Thank you, everyone.